As I said, my name is Sam Pierce from Cycle Industries Europe. Cycling Industries Europe is essentially a trade association based in Brussels. We represent the entire cycling ecosystem, so that includes the major OEMs that many of you are quite familiar with probably, within the bike industry, and also, cargo bike too. But that also includes other, service providers such as bike sharing systems. It includes startups that are producing apps for mapping and routing. We have a very, very broad membership base. But what we essentially are all focused on is getting more people on bikes, getting more people cycling. And as you can see here on the right, we aim to double the use of bikes by 2030, and we aim to create 1 million green and sustainable jobs across the EU in the next 7 years. So 6 years. So that's our goal. And I work specifically on cargo bikes and cycle logistics. So we see huge growth potential here as well, which I will come to shortly. As I mentioned, majority of our members actually are in the services sector, which is obviously, a lot of, for example, in cargo bikes, it's cycle logistics operators. It's as I said, it's a very broad ecosystem that makes up our membership. So just a bit of a quick question from the group. I hope you can see the screen. Does this scene look familiar to anyone? You can raise your hand. Yeah, exactly. There we go. Thank you. And then another one, a nice crowded street with cyclists sort of pushed down the side in the gutter. I think that should probably look familiar to many of us, unfortunately. And then this one. Yes? Okay. Great. Well, unfortunately, that's probably just only going to get worse, especially the last one in terms of deliveries. If nothing is done, deliveries in Europe will grow. E-commerce continues, obviously, to boom. We're all quite familiar with that, I think. Recent studies sort of put this at 8 to 14% year-on-year growth. Parcel volumes doubling by 2030 to 34 billion. And essentially an additional 40,000 new vehicles on our roads, vans predominantly, to meet this extra demand in delivery capacity that will be required. There is obviously a solution, and that's why we're here today. Cargo bikes, there's obviously a growing body of evidence. We're obviously the convinced, but for others, there are others out there. There is a need for more convincing, and there's been numerous studies. And I'd just like to sort of bring your attention. This was a study that was released earlier this year by EIT, which is a European agency for. They've got many agencies around urban mobility. This one, the agency was. Innovation and Energy, Inno Energy is what it's called. They did a really good report about mixed fleets, so progressing towards e-vans and e-cargo bikes for deliveries. And their research found that essentially there were huge cost savings that could be implemented by large parcel delivery providers. If they were to do so today, they could save up to between 95 and 156 million, and by 2030, this would be around 400 to 550 million euros per year. The environmental benefits were obviously quite convincing, given that it is a zero emissions vehicle fleet. Largely, but I think quite important here is that there would be a reduction of 58% of van kilometers driven. So obviously reducing considerably the amount of vans on roads and all the congestion and extra negative externalities that come from that. And then obviously just the operational efficiency for these companies in that e-cargo bikes specifically over any sort of van, e-van or normal van, offers a 40% increase in efficiency, essentially linked with easier parking, shorter distance to the shop front or wherever the delivery is being made, and quicker turnaround in drivers getting from the vehicle, making the delivery, and then getting back in the vehicle. And so we're tracking this at CIE. We're tracking the growth of cycle logistics. We do an annual survey for cargo bikes in general that looks at manufacturers, growth of manufacturing in Europe and externally, and the growth of sales in cargo bikes. But we also do an operator survey where we track the growth in a number of things, including kilometers driven, number of jobs, turnover of companies. So we did that this year between May and June. We had 33 respondents, and this is all conducted online in anonymous way. So, we have an indication of who, obviously, the company size and the general profile of the respondees, but we don't know exactly who they are, which I think helps us, get a bigger response rate. As I said, the sort of focus on the question is around things like details like turnover and fleet information and road safety. And we are largely the only organisation collecting this data on a regular basis at a European level. We've done it for 5 years now, and it started with a previous project called European funded project called the City Changer Cargo Bike Project, which some of you might be familiar with. But we continue to do this today because it is such a valuable data source, I think, for European psychologistics purposes. Just a quick run through of some of the data. I'm not going to go into too much information. If you would like more information about the report, please come to me after the session, and I'm happy to speak with you about it. But I just think some of the key takeaways were we had a very high response rate this year, one of the highest we've ever had, and definitely one of the highest in terms of response rates from the Netherlands. I'd like to thank Jos because he was very helpful in promoting, I think, to his network in the Netherlands. So we had the highest amount of responses from the Netherlands, followed by the UK, Romania and Italy, both with 3, and then Belgium, Denmark, Estonia, France, Hungary, Lithuania, Poland and Sweden, all with 1 response, which I think the reason I just say that is because I think it was a very, very expansive coverage that we had this year. Usually it's quite focused in some of the main Western European countries, but this year we had very, very trans-European coverage, which I think is good to see that there's these operations and they're growing in other parts of Europe. Looking at growth, we had a specific question focused around employment forecast for the psychologistics companies that were surveyed. We had a very positive response, I think, in that 55% essentially indicated that they would be growing either from 50% doubling up to more than having a more than 50% growth. So you can see that in the red and blue parts of the pie graph below there. And then the other sort of large majority was essentially no change, which is still, I think, not so bad, and very little in the way of decline. So I think that's quite positive. Also, obviously, turnover was one of the questions that we asked. And again, we saw quite encouraging figures when it came to the expectations of these companies for the rest of 2024. Bear in mind that this was completed in the first half of this year. But yeah, the expectation was that the survey respondents, they indicated that they would, essentially 80% of survey respondents said that they were expecting growth upwards of 50%. So I think another very positive sign that the sector continues to grow and that the demand is for psychologistic services is growing. There were 2 sort of just pie graphs that I wanted to show because they show quite promisingly what the current situation is. Beyond that, continued growth in employees was another area where essentially there was a 20% increase in the growth of employees. Increase in the distance travelled. There was almost doubled distance travelled average aggregate amount of distance travelled by the operators. So I think that was obviously just a sign that there is growing demand. And road safety is an area that continues to be an issue for this sector that we are looking to address and resolve. And I will come to that now. I think there's a number of ways that we can obviously address road safety, but increase cycle logistics more broadly. And some of the things that we've been doing within CIE and CIE's members have been very active on is working with governments to implement urban vehicle access regulations. So basically regulations that put in place restrictions on vans and diesel vehicles, and putting in place pedestrianised areas. Cargo bikes is a very sort of soft form of mobility, can be implemented in these sorts of areas with very little negative impact on the other road users. So, and that's the trajectory that we see Europe sort of moving in terms of making urban centres more accessible. So, so that's one area that we continue to push for more regulations on, and what will be coming more and more in the future for cities is for city governments is SUMP and SULP plans. So these are sustainable urban mobility plans and sustainable urban logistics plans. Very Euro acronym focused, but essentially basically trying to get more people using active modes of mobility and decarbonising last mile mobility, well, last mile logistics and mobility more broadly. We've been working directly with private sector companies to get them to incentivize their employees to use cargo bikes more and normal bikes just generally. And so that's part of something that we've been working on internally with our members. Members have also been participating in a European funded project called what's it, sorry? Safe LMD, thank you. Another acronym, Safe LMD, and that project has finished now, but there was quite broad support from CIE members, and they participated in a number of surveys that were done there to make sure that what came from that was industry relevant. And then lastly, we regularly meet to discuss standards and regulations, and are looking obviously to have clearer standards process is advancing, and the heavyweight cargo bikes is sort of the final area to be finalised now, and the regulations that will be developed in the future. There is a potential threat to certain parts of the cargo bike market, especially heavyweight cargo bikes. So that's something that we're keeping a very, very close eye on.